Hi everyone, Paul Levy with Brownells here, and today we're covering HyperFire triggers and muzzle devices. First up, we've got their HyperTouch line. Now this is a recently revised line, and what they did is they added these rear serrations, and they've got quite a few models, so I'll cover these real quick. Right here I have the Genesis. This is their base HyperTouch trigger. Now when I say HyperTouch, if you look in here, you'll see it has dual springs. So what those dual springs do is it takes a lot of load off the sear, so that allows a nice, crisp trigger feel with a full weight hammer. So you don't have to increase that hammer and trigger spring to get reliable ignition. So nice, crisp reset. That's the base HyperTouch trigger, the Genesis. Next up I have the Elite, and I have this one disassembled so you can see some of the components. The Elite is very similar to Genesis, but it's a little bit lighter pull weight. So here's the hammer. It's lightened over say a standard mil-spec AR-15 hammer. And here's the dual springs. And the neat thing about these is they're swappable. So you can have either the heavy springs or you can swap to lighter springs, just like so. And this is what really handles your trigger feel, your trigger weight. And then here's a lower mechanism as well. This bar here engages with those springs and forces upward on the hammer. That's the Elite. Next up we have the Competition. A lot like the Elite, this model has a light trigger feel. Still we're talking HyperTouch, so they got the dual spring design, but this one has a straight trigger bow and they added a shoe. You'll see on the back these notches, they're not just for show. You can move this shoe up and down to wherever you prefer. Say if you're down at the bottom, you got a lot of leverage, so a lighter pull. And a lot of people like that. So real quick, I'll show you just how crisp that is. You can see how short that was, and from my feel, pretty light, and then the reset, nice, short, crisp, and positive. That's the Competition. Now, very similar to the Competition, we have the Reflex. And this one's really designed for law enforcement, LE, or the shooter that isn't so much competition oriented or doesn't want that straight trigger bow or the shoe, although they could add it with the rear notches here. So again, really short, crisp trigger pull, and then a nice positive reset. That's the Reflex. Now rounding out the HyperTouch line, we have the Eclipse. And this one right here you'll see out of the gate is visually much more distinctive. That's because they took basically the Competition model, you'll notice the straight trigger bow, and they applied nickel boron to all of the engagement surfaces and all those moving parts. So your hammer, your trigger, and those sear engagement surfaces have a nice, super slick finish. So you have the same trigger weight as say the Competition, but then it has a nice slick finish on it. So again, really short, crisp, positive reset. That's the Eclipse. And that rounds out the HyperTouch line. And then also from HyperFire, we have more of their standard AR-15 trigger groups. So right here, I have the Sharpshooter. Now this guy, you'll notice the configuration is what you've come to know as say an AR-15 configuration, but it does have the HyperFire style hammer. So what you get with that, you can also swap your hammer springs to a different pull weight. You have the serrations on the rear, and then you get still a very nice, crisp trigger pull. You see it broke there, really no creep at all, and then a very positive reset. That's the Sharpshooter. Next up, we have the designated marksman. Now this one has a few very distinctive features. The basic configuration is still AR-15s, that standard military interface. You have your hammer, trigger, and disconnector. You can swap, of course, the hammer spring to get a little bit different feel, but you'll notice that hammer is nice and large, so it has a bit more weight to it, a little bit more mass, so you can ensure your primer strikes are positive. So this is very much a law enforcement military trigger. So I'll go through the trigger pull on this one. You'll notice the trigger bow is slightly different as well. It's got a curvature at the top, so you can place the pad of your finger up there, or place it lower so you get a bit more leverage, and we'll have a felt trigger pull that's a little bit lighter. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can see nice and crisp, and then a nice positive reset, which you want on a military LE style trigger. That's the designated marksman. And then to round out the HyperFire line, we have the heavy gunner. Now this is really their base trigger. It's very much a military, really bare bones trigger assembly with high quality components. So right here you have the trigger bow, standard trigger assembly, disconnector, same configuration as you might come to expect. And then you have your full mass hammer, which you can again choose the hammer spring weight of your choice to really hone in that trigger feel. And again, you get basically military or mil-spec features with really nice components, very precisely machined. That's the heavy gunner. And then also from HyperFire, we have the HyperComp line of muzzle compensators. Right here I have the 556C. This is a very effective muzzle brake or muzzle device. It has 5 baffles to reduce that felt recoil, and then the front of it has a very distinctive slant. So not only do you reduce your recoil, but also your muzzle flip by directing gases upwards, keeping your rifle on target. That's the C. Now here I have the CQ, and this is designed more for the LE crowd with these 4 kind of spikes on the front, or if you just want a different look. That's the 556 CQ. And then rounding out the line, we have the HyperComp 9mm. Of course, those pistol caliber carbines are becoming quite popular in 3-gun or other competitions, or just in general, and this guy's in 9. So if you want a very flat shooting 9mm, already not a lot of recoil, this is going to basically eliminate it. Go with the HyperComp 9mm. That rounds out the HyperFire line of quality products. Thanks for watching.